Hello everybody, it is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News this Tuesday morning. Prime Minister pictured with a glass in his hand, at least 7 bottles on the table, including champagne, gin, and in a nod to the pandemic, what appears to be hand sanitizer. This was 8 days after England was put back into a strict lockdown because of rising COVID cases. But when Boris Johnson was asked if there'd been a party in Downing Street, he told MPs no, and whatever happened, he was sure the rules were followed at all times. Some senior Conservatives have concluded this wasn't true and are, again, calling on him to quit. In a few moments, we'll be asking the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, what he thinks. It's Tuesday, the 24th of May. Senior Conservatives turn on Boris Johnson over photos that appear to show him partying in Downing Street.
They're very difficult to watch, frankly. It's very difficult to look at those photographs because they don't give the impression of seriousness that I think we really need in our country.
Also ahead, MPs conclude that the UK's withdrawal from Afghanistan was a disaster and accuse the Foreign Office of lacking leadership and accountability.
I'm in Odesa as Britain discusses plans with allies to send a naval task force to the Black Sea to try and lift Russia's blockade of Odesa and other Ukrainian ports and try and get their grain out to the hundreds of millions of people who vitally need it.
Plus, scientists warn the UK is in a race to identify new cases of monkeypox before it becomes entrenched. An extraordinary act of kindness by a Wigan plumber helping to keep pensioners warm this winter after they spoke to us on Sky News.
I understand these companies have got to make money. I understand they've got to maintain their equipment that they've got. But not at the rate of a life, not at the rate of someone dying because they can't afford the standard charges now man the gas that they need.
Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, wherever you're watching us around the world, in full bloom, a new ride for Her Majesty as the Queen visits the Chelsea Flower Show. And she went to a war zone and returned with a new friend. We'll speak to a journalist who rescued this dog while reporting from Ukraine. And they're joining us in the studio later on. Which I am very excited about. Good morning. The Prime Minister is facing renewed calls for his resignation after pictures of him were leaked that appeared to show him partying in Downing Street. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps is with us on the programme this morning. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Thanks for joining us. Have you been offered a cup of tea?
I have not, but,
Thank
you very much.
Don't you worry. 4 bottles of wine, 2 bottles of fizz, bottle of gin, 8 blurred out people. How do we explain that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've talked about this before because, as I've told you, my own dad was in hospital during this period. We thought we'd lost him. In fact, we didn't see him for the best part of 4 months. Mm-hmm. I've talked about my, anger about that in the past. However, I think these are things that we've known about. The Prime Minister has said it shouldn't have happened and he has apologised. And, of course, the police have spent their time investigating it as well. So I don't think the fact of the pictures, us seeing them for the first time, changes what the police and Sue Gray would have already known. Yeah, but the Prime Minister did say that he thought that everybody was following the rules. Yes, and look, I don't want to say otherwise because I'm disappointed to see what happened in Downing Street, and we know now because the police have issued fines that wasn't right. And but the Prime Minister has completely reformed Downing Street, set up a new office of the Prime Minister, has a new permanent secretary running that, so it's completely reorganised, has apologised, which I think is very important. And, of course, it's been thoroughly investigated. How disappointed are you with the Prime Minister? Well, I don't think these things should have happened, but I think it's probably worth recalling in context that throughout this period, the Prime Minister himself had been seriously ill, had a close brush with coronavirus. He lost his mum during the period. He's dealing with the pandemic. By the looks of things, he goes and thanks somebody who's leaving, raises a glass to them. And, as I say, I having, like everyone in this country, lived through coronavirus and in many cases made enormous sacrifices, don't enjoy seeing pictures that suggest anything else. But this is well-covered territory. We have seen this, we've known about this, and the only difference is seeing the photograph. Sure. I mean, the problem is, Transport Secretary, that he misled Parliament, didn't he? No, I don't. Look, the question is, was he down there partying? No, clearly not. He'd gone by to to say thanks and raise a glass to a colleague who was leaving. The answer to this, of course, is that the police have spent a lot of time with a lot of people and a lot of resources crawling over it. And they've come to their conclusion. As we know, he wasn't fined for that then.
I understand that, but there's a difference between the police investigation and what he said in Parliament. And if you'll indulge me, I just want to remind our viewers what happened on the 8th of December and the question at Prime Minister's Questions from the Labour MP, Catherine West, who specifically asked about this event.
Will the Prime Minister tell the House whether there was a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, but I'm sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
Comfortable with that?
Yeah, well, look, as I say, he goes down. I mean, I see his red boxes are in which is his work boxes. So it looks to me like he goes down on his way out of the office and thanks the staff and raises a glass and doesn't in his mind recognise that as a party. And indeed, the police have looked into this, spent a lot of time and resources, as I say. And I'm not.
But let me just pick you up there, if I may, Transport Secretary, because people who were at that event have been fined.
Well, and we know from other events, including the birthday, event, that some people in the room were and some people weren't, and the police will have the reason. But I'm not there to double guess either the Met Police or, in fact, the Durham Police, who are looking at different incidents.
Yeah.
And they have to look at the evidence along with Sue Gray and come to their conclusions. And I know in the case of the police, they have Sue Gray.
I'm not asking about the police. I'm asking about what he said in Parliament when he said there was no event on the 13th of November. What did he think was happening when there were all these bottles on the table?
Well, look, I think probably what happened is he's at the end of a busy day. He walks down, he says cheers to somebody who's worked there and walks out. And to him, that is not a party. But actually, of course, we know that there's a final stage to this, which is MPs themselves, through the Privileges Committee, will be looking into what he said to Parliament as well. So we'll even have... I mean, this thing has been pretty well investigated, I would say.
No, I get that.
And there will be further investigations, so you won't be short of further investigation.
I get that, but there were more than two people in one room and there was booze on the table. And he was there and he said later on in Parliament that nothing happened. What did he think people were doing?
Well, he will have been in and out of rooms with lots of people who are working on coronavirus lots of the time. Someone's leaving, he goes and thanks them and raises a glass. Now, look, as I said to you, I have personal reasons for feeling quite strongly emotional about that period of time and the sacrifices that people were making, myself included. So, I don't seek to defend it, nor does the Prime Minister, in fact. He's apologised. I think that the police, Sue Gray, and the Privileges Committee are the right places for these things to be looked into. The police have already done their job. As I say, I don't attempt to second-guess their work, whether that's the Met Police or indeed the Durham Police with the Leader of the Opposition. That is the police's job, to look at those things and make their determinations. We
have confirmation this morning that the meeting that took place between Sue Gray and the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Minister told us that it was the instigation of Sue Gray. Then Number 10 told us otherwise. We're being told this morning, it's been confirmed, that during that meeting, the Prime Minister asked Sue Gray to drop the report.
Look, I wasn't at the meeting, but I know there were officials there. The meeting was actually arranged by officials just on the timing and logistics of the report. So beyond that, I'm afraid I don't have any useful information. How would you feel about the suggestion that the Prime Minister had asked for this report to be dropped, given that publicly he said that he was looking forward to it? Well, look, I haven't seen that
no, but what do you think,
confirmation.
It's really important to know. My viewers this morning will think, what do you mean he asked for the report to be dropped?
Well, as I say, I wasn't in the room, so I don't know that's the case.
How would you feel if it had been the case?
What I do know is it's perfectly normal and proper. In fact, it happened before Sue Gray's interim report for there to be a brief conversation where they just talk about timing and logistics of the report. Exactly what was discussed, I don't know. But, fortunately, and I think this is one of the great things about this country, we live in a country where, everybody has to stick by the rules. When they don't, for example, the fixed penalty notice that we've seen is issued. We have proper processes in place, and Sue Gray, I know from the interim report, let alone what she may well say next, has identified a number of shortcomings in number 10 from that period of time. The Prime Minister's already picked up on a whole series of them and made very fundamental reforms in Downing Street, including a brand new Office of the Prime Minister, which we've never had in this country before, to make sure that propriety and ethics are followed at every turn.
You talk about propriety and ethics. The person that is carrying out what we're told was an independent report is called into the office of the Prime Minister and said, drop the report.
No, look, again, I wasn't there. I don't know that's the case.
We have independently confirmed that happened.
Well, again, I haven't heard that, but what I do know is
How do you feel about that?
Well, hold on a minute. First of all, let's deal with the facts. What I do know is it was officials in number 10 who arranged for the two of them to have a brief discussion.
They were both in the same room.
But it was a technical discussion about timing of the report.
Prime Minister asked to drop the report.
And a totally normal thing to happen before a report like this is published. And quite what they discussed, you seem to have had more information about the inside of the meeting than I do.
You'd be surprised where
I wasn't there. I'm very impressed. Well, the only thing I have to say is that, sometimes, occasionally, things get reported which are not entirely accurate. The civil service were there to make sure that all the correct processes were followed. So I've no particular reason for concern about the two of them meeting. That's normal. It happened before the interim report. And unless we're, casting aspersions on Sue Gray, which I don't think anyone is.
No, we're not.
No, I don't think anyone is. We'll have to wait to hear from Sue. But I can assure you Sue Gray will be completely open, and she has a fearsome reputation. So I'm sure we'll find out.
Strong women, they really get under your skin, don't they? As far as the police are concerned, should they be looking... are you completely comfortable that there were no more fines for the Prime Minister, given that somebody who was actually at the same event that the Prime Minister was at saying that they felt that it was completely unfair? I can't work out why he's not been fined and other people have. The Met's a shambles.
Well, look, I'm not here to criticise the Met. They have a job to do. They threw in loads of resources to this. A lot of people have spent a fortune on, I think you were asking me about it last time I was on, have spent a fortune on it and have turned over all of the evidence that they had enormous access to. So I'm not here to sort of second-guess did the police get this right or wrong. As I say, the police have a difficult job to do in all these circumstances, whether it's the Prime Minister cheering holding a glass up to say cheers to somebody who's leaving, and whether he was therefore just dropping by to move on, or
still against the law at the time.
Well, I was going to say in the case of the birthday wishes event, some people seem to have received fines and some didn't. I don't know why. And similarly, we've got this police investigation of the leader of the opposition and the deputy leader of the opposition up in Durham, and I don't seek to second-guess what they're doing either. I think we have to let the police in this country, who are entirely independent, get on with their job. OK, so just before we move on, because I want to ask you about Ukraine, you're completely comfortable about that photographs on the front page of the papers? Well, look, I'm not. I've already told you I couldn't see my own dad for a long period of time because we were obeying the rules. But I also accept that the Prime Minister has long since apologised, has made fundamental reforms in number 10, and I've no doubt if he had his time again, would not have dropped by to say thank you to a member of staff leaving. So, no, I'm not, but it is what it is. And we're about to talk about Ukraine, and there are potential for industrial action on our railways, many other things that the country does need to get on with. Let's move on to Ukraine. What are we doing to try to get this grain out of Odesa? Well, I'm very concerned about it. I met with my opposite number, Alexander Kubrikov, last week, who's the Infrastructure Transport Secretary of State in Ukraine. I met with him in Germany last week and we were discussing details which I can't go into, but about how infrastructure could be in place to ensure that grain leaves. I'm specifically concerned with the situation in Ukraine. We've seen this barbaric invasion by Putin. What really worries me is we've seen many lives lost in Ukraine. We could see even more lives lost in other places in the world through grain and food shortages, which could be even greater than the lives lost in the war directly. So we do need to find solutions to getting this. Are we going to try and organise safe passage? Well, we're looking at all the different options, and as I said, I don't want to go into detail with my conversation with Kubrikov, but there are lots of different potential ways to get grain and other goods out of the country, and indeed goods into the country as well. I think it's absolutely essential that we do, otherwise there could be a lot of hunger, indeed even famine, which could dwarf the numbers involved in the war itself.
Some of the papers this morning suggesting that we may send military ships down there in order to try to organise that safe passage.
You will have seen the speculation. I can't go into specific detail. There are a lot of complexities to this, including mined waters in the near Odesa port. Clearly, the situation with Russia and Putin and their approach to this could make that very difficult. But as I say, the big top line is it's hard to overestimate the extent to which Ukraine was and is the breadbasket of the world. Actually, their flag, which is the blue on top is the sky and the yellow underneath, is actually the grain or the corn or the wheat. It's the fields. And it's because they are such a big producer of the world's food. So it is important that we seek to help them find ways to get it out.
Closer to home, if we have a rail strike, are we going to prioritise freight trains so that there is still food on the shelves?
Yes, we'll do exactly that. But look, I love the railways, and I know the people who work on them do as well. I don't want to see strikes on our railways. I think this is very, very premature. I noticed that the unions were saying it's because they want their pay unfrozen. It is going to be unfrozen. No one's talking about pay staying where it was. We do have to balance rail workers with the needs of doctors and nurses and teachers and the rest of the public service. So it is important that we get that balance right. The taxpayer has put in £16 billion. That's £600 per family household, whether you use the trains or not. And we've done that to keep the trains running. No one lost their jobs during coronavirus, but we do need to reform our railways. So I'm looking to get this resolved. I want the unions to do that as well. I urge them not to call strikes. I think it will be completely counterproductive to a railway, which frankly is on life support, and that could give it a heart attack.
But just to confirm that you will prioritise freight trains if necessary?
Correct, yeah.
OK, so we don't need to worry about empty shelves?
No, we'll make sure that we get... Because freight and distribution and the supply chain are absolutely critical. And talking about food from Ukraine, making sure that distribution, both of energy and food, nationally takes place is very important, and we'll prioritise that. But I think it's important to recognise, our railways can't carry on. We've lost a quarter of our passengers and a quarter of the income, and actually they haven't been reformed for many, many years. I want to build up a bigger railway ultimately, but I need to work in cooperation with the unions on that, and I really hope that they'll do that rather than, as I say, essentially, just as the railways are trying to recover, give it a heart attack. We
are out of time, but I throw enough brickbats at you. A bouquet in the form of a road haulier who I spoke to in Wigan last week, and he said it's got much better for road haulage now, and there aren't the challenges that they had before. So next time Grant Shapps is on your programme, can you tell him? So there you go. Thank you. Well, we took 33 measures to try to help that market and get freight moving again, and I'm pleased to hear that. It's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed, Mr. Shapps. Thanks. Looking at the front pages, I wonder what they're thinking Downing Street this morning. Partygate dominating this morning's front pages. The Metro leads with the publication of photos apparently showing the Prime Minister giving a toast at an event that broke lockdown rules. That was in November of 2020. The Guardian has a similar picture showing Boris Johnson holding a drink inside Number 10. Daily Telegraph reports that the Met Police is coming under pressure for not fining Boris Johnson for attending the leaving event for his aid. The Daily Express has the headline, "Nothing to see here," also in response to the Prime Minister not getting fined. Still to come on the programme for you this morning, we'll speak to the London Mayor Sadiq Khan as the new Elizabeth line finally opens to the public after more than 10 years and almost £20 billion spent on the project. I'm going to speak to Richard Ratcliffe, the husband of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. She was forced to sign a false confession before leaving Iran. I'm joined by a former Afghan MP who escaped the Taliban as a report outlines deep failures of leadership in government during the evacuation from Kabul. Cross-Party Foreign Affairs Committee has concluded that the UK's withdrawal from Afghanistan and chaotic evacuation of Kabul was a foreign policy disaster that helped embolden Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine. And the Transport Secretary warned on this programme a moment ago that more people could die around the world because of the Russian blockade on grain and food exports. than in the war itself. Our International Affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, is in Odesa for us. Hi, Dominic, good morning to you. I'm sure you heard what the Transport Secretary said. They're looking at options as far as Odesa is concerned.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to ponder as to whether Liz Truss, who today is reported to be considering, along with Lithuania and other allies, the idea of sending a naval task force to the Black Sea to lift that blockade, whether that is a serious consideration or whether it's just something that she has been dreaming up to keep readers in the Daily Express happy and interested. But a solution will need to be found because this is a huge crisis that is brewing here. Okay, 1 in 20 people around the world got their food from grain grown in Ukraine last year because it was a bumper harvest and because it has really rich soil that allows it to export 70% of its crops. Normally that would be getting out through the ports behind me, but they are standing still. None of it is getting out here, a trickle across the land borders into the European Union. We travelled through the grain belt of Ukraine to talk to farmers to see what this is doing to them, and then we came here and gained rare access to the ports here to discuss with ministers and officials here exactly what this will mean and the disastrous implications it could have for the rest of the world.
For mile after mile, stretching across Ukraine, a rippling green sea of wheat. This is why they call it the breadbasket of the world. When Dutch farmer Kees Huizinga first came here to farm 20 years ago, this is what drew him here.
I mean, this is perfect. And it's the famous Ukrainian black soil. I mean, it's the best soil in the world.
70% of what Ukraine's farmers harvest is exported, last year feeding 400 million people around the world. But barely any of it is getting out now, with the country blockaded by Russia, making farmers like Kees increasingly desperate.
And there's still 25 million tons of grain and oilseeds left in Ukraine. That's the third of last year's harvest. So the only option is to get the grain out of Ukraine is through the Black Sea ports. They have to be opened. That's the only option.
There's currently enough grain stuck in Ukraine's silos to feed all the world's least developed nations for a year.
The world was already facing a food supply crisis because of COVID-19, climate change and rising fuel prices. But if Ukraine can't get its grain out of these silos and to the international markets, that crisis could become a catastrophe for hundreds of millions of people.
On Ukraine's Black Sea coast, its ports stand idle. We gained rare access to the port in Odesa, which should be busy exporting last year's harvest. Nothing is happening here now.
This is Ukraine's problem and the rest of the world's. Over here, 250,000 tons of Ukrainian grain in these vast silos, and across the dock here, a vessel that's got 60,000 tons of grain in it that hasn't moved since February. Because until Russia's naval blockade out at sea is lifted, none of this is going anywhere.
Vladimir Putin has his heel on the jugular of the world's food supply. If safe passage can't be found through these waters, the chaos and suffering he's brought to Ukraine will also be felt far away from here.
Well, I think it's one of the rules of war, Kay, that the effects of a conflict are not confined to the area where it's being fought, and that certainly will be the case here if this grain can't get out to those hundreds of millions of people who need it. If you look at what happened in the Arab Spring, climate change led to rising wheat prices, and that undoubtedly helped fuel the unrest that caused such chaos and turmoil across the Arab world. We could see that happening elsewhere in the world, in the Middle East and elsewhere. That ship in that report has 60,000 tons of grain bound for Egypt, a poor country that desperately needs it. And that's a fraction of what needs to be got out of these ports. The solutions are fairly limited. You can get a little bit more of it out of the land crossings into Europe, but issues like red tape and differences in railway gauge make that very challenging. The Ukrainian minister we spoke to, the Deputy Agricultural Minister we spoke to here, says that he would like to see the Ukrainians given more weapons by the West to attack Russia's navy itself. The alternative to that is the West sending its own navies in, as Liz Truss is reported to have been discussing with allies, to escort these ships out. Now, that is fraught with peril because it could see Western navies locked in confrontation with their Russian counterparts, potentially leading to a kind of World War III situation. That is a thorny dilemma for Western policymakers to grapple with, but the impression you get is that 3 months into this conflict, to the day, they've only really begun thinking about it and trying to come up with solutions.
OK, Dominic, for now, thank you. In other news, the US President Joe Biden has said there had been no change of policy on Taiwan despite his comments yesterday when he volunteered military support for the self-governed island claimed by China. He made the remarks during a visit to Japan. Tom standing by for us. The question again, I suppose, is, good morning, Tom, whether he misspoke because his comments were clarified very quickly, weren't they, by the White House?
Morning, Kay. Yes, they were very shortly afterwards and clarified again by the president himself today. What's at stake here is this idea of strategic ambiguity, which has been the US policy towards Taiwan and China for a long time. Basically not saying whether or not they would support Taiwan militarily in terms of troops on the ground in the event of a Chinese attack on Taiwan. And that's again what he reiterated today. He was asked directly if he would send troops to Taiwan if China invaded, and he says the policy has not changed at all. I think all of this has to be seen, of course, in the context of Ukraine. First of all, this tour of Asia, President Biden's first tour, a sign that the US is focused on Asia despite its interests in Ukraine. And second, this idea of strategic ambiguity. Even if the policy hasn't changed, perhaps the feeling is that Putin obviously wasn't deterred in his invasion of Ukraine, and they don't want to make the same mistake with China. So even if they're saying the policy hasn't changed, perhaps showing behind it, hinting that there would be a firm resolve if China were to attack. China regards this as its own internal affair. It sees Taiwan as a breakaway promise. It didn't seem too rattled, although it did put a firm response saying it would safeguard its territorial interests.
OK, for now, thank you. So in 4 minutes' time, actually, it's already open. The Elizabeth line has just opened. We'll be speaking to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, in just a moment or two. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, meantime, says Iran forced her to sign a last-minute false confession at the airport in Tehran as a condition of her release. She also says a UK government official was with her when she signed it under duress before Iranian authorities would let her leave. Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe was released in March, 6 years after being arrested on spying charges.
I knew that was like a last-minute game because I knew they told me that they have been given the money. So what is the point of making me sign a piece of paper which is incorrect? It's a forced confession.
To all the things they had been accusing you of.
Exactly. And also the British government not questioning it, why I have to do it.
So a British official was with you when you signed that?
She was with me, yeah. But also the whole thing was filmed. The whole thing of me signing the forced confession was filmed.
And we are going to hear from her husband very shortly indeed here on the programme. Not before the weather, though.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
An active jet stream will bring gusty winds and spells of rain over the next few days, but there will be some brighter spells too, and things should settle down for the weekend.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Let's have a look at some cool pics for you, should we? Put together by Marlon for you this morning. Telegraph, lovely photo of the Duchess of Sussex giving her husband a big kiss after he won a polo tournament in Santa Barbara on Sunday. Looking at The Guardian for you. Lovely picture here as, wow, how cool is that? It's a group of puffins on the Farne Islands near Northumberland. The birds return every year around March or April to breed after spending the winter out at sea. And finally, why did the duckling cross the road? Well, because they were following their mum, of course, all 24 of them. They were spotted walking across a residential road in the Norfolk village of Ashill. So all the cars just waited until they managed to cross the road. Well done you, Mum, for having 24. The Queen, meantime, I went to the flower show yesterday and I saw Her Majesty. She's got new wheels. She was looking very sprightly indeed. She arrived in a buggy to tour the gardens. The Queen is patron of the event run by the Royal Horticultural Society and has attended more than 50 times in her 70-year reign. Buckingham Palace said it was a last-minute decision for the 96-year-old monarch to attend, as she's been suffering from mobility issues.
The Queen is about to celebrate her Platinum Jubilee. something that no other monarch has done.
That's 70 years of duty, dedication and service. Sky News will bring you the celebrations and pageantry to mark this historic occasion.
Plus, a very special guest.
I'll be joining the Sky News team as we celebrate the very best of Britain, and we cannot wait. That's the Platinum Jubilee on Sky News.
Coming up, we're going to be speaking, as I said, to Richard Ratcliffe, the husband of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who's revealed she was forced to sign a false confession before leaving Iran in March. That to come. Hello again, everybody. You're very welcome to join us here on The Breakfast Show on Sky News this morning. Top stories for you. Some senior Conservatives have turned on Boris Johnson over photos that appear to show him partying in Downing Street. And the Transport Secretary warns on this programme a moment ago that more people could die around the world because of the Russian blockade on grain and food exports than in the war in Ukraine itself. Also, scientists warn the UK is in a race to identify new cases of monkeypox before it becomes entrenched. As I said, Grant Shapps was on the show just a few moments ago, and I asked him whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament after pictures emerged of him raising a glass at an event at Downing Street during lockdown when he'd previously denied that a party took place.
The question is, was he down there partying? No, clearly not. He'd gone by to say thanks and raise a glass to a colleague who was leaving. You know, the answer to this, of course, is that the police have spent a lot of time with a lot of people and a lot of resources crawling over it. It looks to me like he goes down on his way out of the office and thanks the staff and raises a glass and doesn't, in his mind, recognise that as a party.
Mayor of London Sadiq Khan is with us to talk about the Elizabeth line, but just let me put that to you, Mr Khan. Good morning to you. Before we talk about the success of the Elizabeth line, are you completely comfortable with the investigation that the Metropolitan Police has done, given the pictures that are all over the front pages today?
Well, it's really important I explain to you your views. I've been assiduous as the Police and Crime Commissioner, who is a Labour politician, not to get involved at all in an investigation from the Met Police into a political opponent. It's right and proper that there's operational independence. But I think the reality is, when we police by consent, when we need the confidence of the public when it comes to policing issues, when questions are being asked about police investigation and its integrity, that the police explain some of the conclusions they've reached. I think it's right and proper they do so. Yes, of course, there are big questions about whether the Prime Minister misled the House. There clearly was a party. He was raising his glass. There were empty wine bottles there. Sue Gray will be publishing a report later on this week. But I think the police should be explaining how they reached their conclusions. That's the right thing for them to do.
How surprised are you that he wasn't fined for that event?
Well, look, I don't want to get into what's happened. All I've seen is a photo yesterday for the first time. And as a normal citizen, forget as a Police and Crime Commissioner, it did beg a number of questions. That's why I think it's important, because many people across the country will be having similar questions, that the Met Police explain how they reached their conclusions. They may have seen other evidence. It's for them to explain so. And the reason why it's important is because we police by consent. We need to have confidence in our police. The police must police and investigate without fear or favour. But I know from reading the newspapers today, from watching Sky News this morning, from speaking to Londoners, there are many questions they have, including to Boris Johnson, to explain how you can be raising a glass, having empty booze lying around, and it not be a party, and at the same time, weeks later, tell the House of Commons there wasn't a party.
Yeah, we'll move on to Crossrail in 1 second. Just a final point on that, though, if I may. I mean, rule-breaking, law-breaking in your city. Should the Met come to explain to you, as the Mayor of London, why there haven't been more fines in Downing Street?
Well, so more than 120 fixed penalty notices, fines have been issued by the police into Downing Street parties. No other address, as I understand it, in the country has had so much law-breaking over the recent past. I am asking the Met Police to provide the urgent clarity. I think they've got to provide, not simply because you're asking the question, but people across the country, not unreasonably, will be saying, hold on a second, I followed all the rules. I was meticulous in relation to following the rules. those that broke the rules were fined. And here we have a photograph which looks like the Prime Minister caught red-handed breaking the rules. Some would call it a smoking gun. So the police should explain how it is that more fines weren't issued. That being said, it's really important I make this point again and again. I've not got involved in this investigation. There's been independence. It's improper for me as a political opponent to be telling or advising or instructing the police what to do. But I think there are legitimate questions people are asking, which is why I'm asking the police to provide the clarity.
OK. Talk to me about the Elizabeth line. It's been a long time coming.
Well, listen, the first plans for this particular line were talked about in the 1940s before Sky News first went on air. The first bill, aborted attempt at 1991. I remember Ken Livingstone, the first mayor, lobbying for this, and I give credit to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown for giving the green light. The first bill went through Parliament when I first became an MP, 2005, Royal Assent, 2008. When I was a Transport Minister in 2009, the first construction began in Canary Wharf, and last week Her Majesty the Queen formally opened this line named after her in this Platinum Jubilee year. It's a remarkable, transformative railway line. It's a landmark moment for our city. It will contribute £42 billion towards our nation's economy. The trains are built in Derby, the doors for the stations in Cheshire, the signage in the Isle of Wight, the steel from Dorset. More than 70,000 jobs already created around the country. I'm proud as the mayor, but also as a Brit.
But there's a bit of an issue. It's 73 miles long, which is it goes from Essex, I believe, to Berkshire. But there's some problems with construction at Bond Street. Is that right? So you can't actually travel the whole line in one go until next year.
So this new line today is more than 100 kilometres from Reading in Berkshire to Shenfield in Essex. At the moment, you've got to just jump off the train and get on another train at Paddington and then at Liverpool Street. And that was always a plan. But the good news is, rather than waiting a year, as was the original plan, before that to be fully integrated, it will happen this autumn. As it is in London, often you've got to change from one line to the other, so the DLR, you clock in, clock out. The same goes for the Waterloo and City line. Nothing new there, except what is new is these trains are air-conditioned, you can walk through. The stations are like cathedrals. I'm here at Farringdon, where you've got a sideways lift going down. So look, let's enjoy these 100 kilometres from the west in Reading to the east in Essex and be proud of this fantastic engineering feat.
Sounds amazing. Looking forward to travelling on it, Mr Mayor. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
You'll love it.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. Sadiq Khan saying he wants the police to explain themselves.
Yes, urgent clarity, he says, is needed about their decision-making, something the Met have not done and don't generally do, because he says people will see this photograph and think the Prime Minister has been caught red-handed, he said, breaking the rules that everyone else was following. And I think the pressure is only going to escalate on the Metropolitan Police to explain why it appears that other people were fined over gatherings on that date, the 13th of November, but the Prime Minister, picture there, glass in hand, in front of various other people, even if, as Grant Shapps put it, he just wandered in for a minute, gave a speech and left. Did he not think this appears to be a party and I should do something to stop it?
In fact, he said it wasn't a party in
he said,
House of Commons.
Indeed, he said, asked whether it was, he could clarify whether there was a party. He said no. So it also raises questions about whether he's misled Parliament. So big questions for the Prime Minister and the police already. And we've only seen one photo. We haven't seen the full Sue Gray report, which we believe will be arriving tomorrow. And just another thought for you, Kay. I think a lot of people are focusing on whether, as a result of this, Tory MPs will force a leadership challenge against Boris Johnson, and our general thinking is that they probably won't. But that is not the only measure of whether this has been damaging, of course. It has arguably been quite a damaging few months. The Tories didn't do very well in the local elections. They're struggling to find answers to the cost of living and other questions. And if Boris Johnson's authority is chipped away at as a result of all this, that could make things very difficult.
Just a thought on the story from our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, saying that this meeting that did take place between Sue Gray and the Prime Minister was putting pressure on her.
That's right. This is quite an incendiary claim from sources to Sky News that as a result of this meeting at the beginning of May between Boris Johnson and Sue Gray, initially claimed that she initiated, but Downing Street admitted yesterday that number 10 officials had initiated it. It is now claimed, and Sky News understands, that it was suggested that Sue Gray might want to drop the whole report because according to the account in the Times anyway, Boris Johnson said, oh, well, we know it all, it's all out there, that you may not want to do the full report. Now, we don't know what she said, and of course we're expecting the report to come out tomorrow, and no one is doubting her probity, but certainly the idea that the Prime Minister would have suggested it will outrage a lot of people.
I'm sure. We'll see you at the top of the hour. Thanks very much indeed tomorrow. Thanks. We've been telling you about Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. She said that she was forced to sign a false confession under duress as a condition of her release from Iran. She spent 6 years in prison after being arrested on spying charges that she had always contested. Nazanin's husband, Richard, friend of the programme, is with us now, as you can see. Hi, Richard. It's great to see. I haven't chatted to you since she was released and brought back to the UK. How are things at home? I bet the baby's thrilled, isn't she?
Yeah, no, that's right. It's a much nicer context to be having these kind of interviews now. And as you say, yeah, it's a whole new world for us, a lot more relaxed. Gabriella, very pleased to have her mum and dad back. I don't think I'd appreciated quite how angry she used to get. Now Nazanin's back, much calmer. I mean, there's a bit more navigating between the command of two parents, and rather than just having to manoeuvre her dad around her little finger. But yeah, no, I think it's, for all of the tensions of that first interview, for all of the tensions of the false confession we're talking about now, it's a whole different world to be back home.
Now, talk to me about what happened before she left Iran and why she wants to talk about that now.
Yeah, so just before Nazanin was allowed to leave the country, she was taken on two occasions. On the Monday, before she was taken to a Revolutionary Guard office in the middle of the night, well, late night, so 9 p.m. until 11 p.m, and was required to sign a false confession, which she resisted. She'd been taken there by British officials. Wouldn't sign the confession that was put in front of her. It was a blank template, effectively, where they would fill in whatever they wanted to accuse her of. Wrote out something else, said, listen, this is what I was convicted of, having to acknowledge that I was convicted of this. 2 days later at the airport, again, another version of the confession was brought in front of her. And this time, the British officials also said, listen, if you want to get on that plane, you have to sign this. So very angry. I was, as you all remember, was sitting at home getting texts from her as to where things were. I'm furious that it happened. Pleased that she's home. Hugely pleased that she's home. But yeah, I think it was startling that the British government also required her to sign that confession.
How concerned is she by making this public, that there might be challenges for her family back in Iran?
Yeah, I think she was certainly worried. I think she was worried anyway that it was going to be used in TV propaganda, both in terms of news pieces, but also in terms of drama series and other ways. That was what she complained about, both to the Foreign Secretary and to the Prime Minister when we met privately. And yeah, I think generally the criticism she's made of the Iranian authorities, there's a worry as to what rebounds. Candidly, I think it felt very important that she did it. There's a lot of people, friends she's got left behind, sitting in prison cells who are being abused in horrible ways, and she has a platform where it's important to say that the Iranian authorities are completely out of line. But yeah, there's always a risk as to what happens next.
Thrilled that she's back and that family life is getting back to normal for you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Richard. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Lovely to see with a smile on his face, isn't it? Now to an extraordinary act of kindness for you. You may remember last week, during our special coverage of the cost of living crisis from Wigan, that a retired couple whose boiler had broken. Remember them? Well, they feared that they might not survive another winter until community plumbing charity, DEFA CIC, came to their rescue. Here's Katerina.
I'm sorry to say, love, you've no midsummer.
Last week in Wigan, we met Godfrey and Jeanette Ward. They told us how their boiler was broken. Unable to afford a new one and pay rising bills, they'd been living in the freezing cold, showering at a neighbour's. Their story moved people to action.
Well, we've got this.
So when did this get put in?
Saturday.
This brand new boiler was donated for free after the couple appeared on Sky News. What's it been like waking up with, hot water again?
Oh, great.
Beautiful.
What was the first thing that you did?
Washing up.
Wash up.
Like so many struggling families, Jeanette and Godfrey are proud. They didn't want to ask for help, and when Jeanette got pneumonia over winter and things got desperate, they didn't know where to ask.
Well, we had to do something, Godfrey. Like you said, we couldn't manage another winter.
I don't think we would have managed another winter.
And now, what do you think now?
Oh, a lot more optimistic now.
The Ward's case might seem extreme, but the plumbing charity that fitted their boiler says it's helped thousands of families just like theirs, and warns that as energy prices go up, things will get worse.
People are going to die, and they are. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to say people may suffer or people may go without. People will die. I understand these companies have got to make money. I understand they've got to maintain their equipment that they've got, but not at the rate of a life, not at the rate of someone dying because they can't afford the standing charges, never mind the gas that they need. You'd be good, okay.
For now, their warm home and a hand with bills has lifted some worry. But there are many more living in fear of the future, not sure how and when help will come. Katerina Vitozzi, Sky News in Wigan.
A group of MPs say that Afghan allies and British soldiers were utterly let down by the chaotic evacuation from Kabul last summer. Tom Tugendhat, who's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, produced the report.
I know how much effort we put in. I know what it cost, quite literally, so many of us, not to be able to get straight answers out of those who were charged with leading the evacuation. Frankly, it's not good enough.
Well, here to give us her reaction to that report is former Afghan MP Shukriya Barakazi. It's good to see you. Thank you. Just explain the mask for us.
Thank you. Good morning. This mask is a sign of solidarity with the Afghan women, and particularly the journalists, where Taliban was ordered that the masks, putting and wearing masks for all TV anchors and females is compulsory. So that's just the sign of solidarity, how hard and how difficult it is while you're thinking it's a lifetime lockdown where the Afghan women are right now. Goodness. And the people of Afghanistan.
Talk to me about the report that you have seen, the Afghan report by our MPs here in this country. What do you think?
I think it's really timely report. Also, they assist and they measure the evacuation process. I can understand it was very difficult, but it was also a very chaotic situation. Everything was just out of control, from my understanding, but there was a possibility to manage better, and particularly for those whom they left behind and those whom they work with the UK government and particularly with the British Army. And their allies in civil society and other governmental body organisations.
The report says there was a lack of leadership at the top. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely right. I myself, I was been struggling how I will be able and who is the responsible person to be in contact while I was been stuck in Afghanistan. And it was really nightmare because the phone number they provide, there was an automatic phone. And there was no one and even a single email address that could respond back how to do and what to do, where to go, and who's the contact person.
Who do you think is responsible for that?
Well, it's hard to say because it's not only one institution, but in such an emergency situation, a little bit of organizing people and selecting responsible people and avoiding extra unnecessary bureaucracy is necessary.
Tell us about your journey from out of Afghanistan to finding yourself in the UK.
Well, my one is a very unique one. The way I was been evacuated from Afghanistan, the way I was been under threat with the Taliban, And yet, and I think still, there are some people that Home Office don't want to reach to them or they don't want to listen. For instance, I myself, I was not been settled in a hotel and still I am in a very temporary place, yet the Home Office didn't provide me any housing. And I can understand the exaggeration of those families that for the almost near 9 months, they are living in the hotels with their kids. I think it's very costly and also it's very devastating to pass all your time in a tiny room of hotel, and particularly with the kids, younger kids, it's very difficult. It's like one trauma, we've not been find ourselves back to passing another trauma and finding ourselves in a different environment, different culture. Coping everything is not easy, but we are trying to be part of UK and to not be burned on their shoulder. We would like to stand on our feet and contribute back.
Do you envisage a time when you will be able to return to Afghanistan?
Oh, definitely, certainly. I'm here just because I don't want to live and I don't want to work under the Taliban regime. From my understanding, although they are eliminating women systematically, for me as a single mother that I have responsibility for my 4 kids, I should do and serve them. So I'm not able to work there according to Taliban rules. But beside of that, my aim, my goal is to be back. And I like the UK government to stand with the people of Afghanistan, not with the Taliban, and do not give recognition to the Taliban, because this is the time that we should think about our shared values from where we start and where we are right now.
Do you feel that the British government is standing with the Taliban?
Well, somehow they want to be engaged, but we would like their engagement more with the democratic alternative address from the Taliban. Because if as much as you go and give legitimacy to Taliban under the name of engagement or humanitarian aid, that much you give more legitimacy and power to the Taliban. And I think enough is enough. Taliban are not the group, they are just a terrorist. They've been terrorists. And the way the power was been handed over, there was a great mistakes. And I think it's better to learn from the mistake to do not repeat it again.
Good to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the programme this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Have you seen those pictures on the front pages of the papers today? We're told by the government minister this morning that it wasn't a party. The Prime Minister popped in to raise a glass to one of his aides that was leaving, but it definitely wasn't a party. Under no circumstances was it a party. It definitely wasn't a party.